It is no show place, this town. Not wealthy, not well known. Before what happened here in December 1944, or even since. For 7 days, history paused at a crossroads in this Belgian Ardennes village and then passed on. Unless we can call history the echoes that ring in the memories of the men who make it, as they did in the battle at St. Vith.
Not much time for sleeping, eating at irregular hours.
The fact was that everyone and every unit was fighting for its own life.
You're going to get it, Sepp. Maybe this is it.
Colonel, C battery is firing at 150 yards.
Cold. When you're cold, you stay cold. There's no way of getting warm.
We've got no orders to retire.
Und es war nicht möglich, etwa St. Vith meinerseits vom deutschen Angriff hier auszusparen.
In the fall of 1944, the German army had been fighting for 5 years. Allied confidence was high, its strength overwhelming, and the halt in its sweep across Europe at the German frontier regarded as temporary. There, the forces of Field Marshal von Rundstedt held desperately, their calls for reinforcements answered by inferior materials or silence. General Siegfried Westphal, von Rundstedt's chief of staff, recalls these days on the Western Front as the most uneasy he had spent, until the day in late October when he learned the reason for the stubborn silence of the Wehrmacht High Command.
Hitler received us and informed us that he was planning a large-scale offensive in the West in the near future. We were going to receive 20 infantry divisions and 10 Panzer divisions, newly and completely equipped, and the land operations would be supported by at least 3,000 fighters. The target of this operation, which was to be initiated in the area west and south of Cologne, would be the capture of the port of Antwerp.
3 German armies would launch the massive counteroffensive to split the Allied forces and capture their best port of supply, Antwerp. What would end as the greatest pitched battle ever fought by American troops, the Battle of the Bulge, would burst without warning on a quiet sector on the First Army front. In December 1944, it was held in the north by the 2nd and 99th Divisions, by the veteran exhausted 28th and the 4th Divisions to the south, and by the newly arrived 106th, thinly spread at the center.
Conditions were fairly miserable. It was intermittently raining and snowing. We were relieving the 2nd Infantry Division. We, as a brand new, young, inexperienced division, were being moved into their position to take up the defense of that particular sector. We were introduced sort of ironically, as I now recall, because most of the battle-tested veterans of the 2nd Infantry Division kept talking to each one of the units of the 106, talking about what a country club area this was to be. You would hear perhaps some few shots fired each day. I am Thomas J. Riggs, Jr. I was the division engineer of the 106th Infantry Division.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Oliver Patton. In December of 1944, I was a 2nd lieutenant in an infantry company of the 106th Division. The division landed in France and went into the line and straddled the German-Belgian border about the 9th of December, 1944. Looking back on it now, I think probably the division was just about as green as I was, and you couldn't be much greener. I was a 2nd lieutenant, just out of Fort Benning.
The supervision of all preparations was in the hands of von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West. Participants in the attack were the 6th SS Panzer Army under SS Group Commander-in-Chief Dietrich on the right, the 5th Panzer Army under General of the Panzer Force von Manteuffel, and the 7th Army at the left wing under General Brandenberger for coverage in the south. While the operation was being prepared, it was important above all to keep this a secret from the Allied forces.
Dass sie den Alliierten verborgen blieb.
All movements were made during the night only. All vehicles in the front vicinity were wrapped in straw to keep the noise to a minimum. But nobody could predict how the situation would develop by December 16th.
Von Manteuffel, Westphal, von Rundstedt, Model. From the beginning, Hitler's generals saw no guarantee of success for the counteroffensive. But the Fuhrer was adamant. His plan was irrevocable. Its key elements were surprise, speed, and to prevent Allied air cover, bad weather, as specified in this basic order from the Wehrmacht High Command.
Die Operation findet
The operation will take place only under favorable weather conditions. These will be ordered by the Fuhrer. These sentences induced me to call up headquarters and ironically inquire whether Hitler was now ordering the weather too.
Telefonischen Anfrage beim Hauptquartier, ob Hitler nunmehr auch das Wetter befehlen würde.
The weather did take sides. It was a harsh, confusing enemy to Combat Command B of the 7th Armored Division under General Bruce C. Clark. But the weather was a close ally of 5th Panzer Army Commander General Hasso von Manteuffel.
General, I'm reminded of December 1944 when you and I saw these beautiful green and quiet hills, all covered with haze and mist and turning into rain and mud and snow. And I can't help but think how weather played a very important part in that time, as you knew so well.
Yes. Ich darf daran erinnern, dass es ja ein Hauptplan war von Hitler.
It had been Hitler's plan to start the offensive only during bad weather. And during the days prior to the attack, the weather actually was bad, so that the German High Command was afraid it might change to clear winter weather and blue skies, in which case your aerial combat forces might have stopped the attack in its very early stage. In fact, the weather on December 16 was just as you described it now. Visibility was bad. The advanced artillery observers, for instance, would have not been able to make out individual targets on the hills.
Man konnte nicht sehr weit sehen. Die vorgeschobenen Beobachter der Artillerie hätten beispielsweise nicht oben einzelne Ziele auf den Höhen erkennen können.
But over there, as you will agree, the riflemen had fields of fire. The tanks were also able to recognize their targets at a distance of 2,000 meters. I therefore started the attack very early, at 5 a.m., as you know, to take advantage of the darkness and the bad weather, which would enable us to advance far into these hills you can see here, a typical Ardennes terrain, by noon.
Auf diese Höhen, die wir hier auch sehen, alle, das ist ja typisch für die Ardennen, dass wir da schon angelangt sein konnten.
Preparations, evaluations, and obvious shortcomings became sort of academic on the early morning of December 16th. In this supposed very quiet sector, we suddenly found ourselves hit with an immense artillery barrage that included calibers of guns up to railroad carriage type, landing in all sectors, including the Division CP and Vith. Immediately after this barrage lifted, it probably lasted about an hour, I started to get reports from my various companies, each one of which was attached to each of the 3 infantry regiments of the 106th Infantry Division. These reports were excited. They were, however, objective. They showed that we were being hit by a fairly massive force.
In the 28th Division's area to the south, the opening guns of the offensive aroused the commanding officer of the 112th Regiment, Colonel Guston Nelson.
I immediately jumped out of the bed, ran downstairs, and rang up division headquarters, which was then about 40 miles away at Wiltz. And I got a sleepy major on the phone. I asked him what was going on in the honeymoon sector, and he said he didn't know. And I said, you better find out. I said, there's either a major attack or a raid-in force going on there, and artillery's coming in like the very mischief.
Even though we in the Division CP thought we understood that this was a massive attack, we encountered great difficulty in getting acceptance of this information, or thought we did anyway, through our Corps and Army to our rear. I really believe that they thought that we were a young, untried division and were slightly excited. However, this same type of information began filtering back to them from our neighboring divisions, the 99th on our left and the 28th on our right. The seriousness of this situation finally became evident to VIII Corps later in the day, at which point they attached to us primarily the Combat Command B of the 9th Armored Division.
Combat Command B of the 9th Armored Division was led by General William Hogue, who was preparing an attack in the north that morning when his new assignment reached him.
I then went to St. Vith and reported to General Jones, commander of the 106th Division. He told me that there was an attack all along his front and that 2 of his regiments were partially surrounded to the east of St. Vith. He did not have a very clear picture as to the nature of the attack, but said it was rather strong. He directed me to move to St. Vith as soon as possible.
Later that same day, we were also informed by 1st Army behind VIII Corps, to which we were attached, that the 7th Armored Division would attack through St. Vith to our east, and that we were to hold these routes, which were quite vital and a strategic road net in that area, free for this attack. This promised attack or counterattack by the 7th Armored Division through our position is very critical because it influenced all of the division's decisions from there on out.
Since the 7th Armored Division was to counterattack through Colonel Riggs' position to the east, General Hogue was instructed to attack to the southeast when his armor arrived. There, another regiment of the 106th was cut off. But the 7th Armored Division was headquartered some 60 miles away to the north in Holland. And there was little urgency in the cry for help that finally reached his commander, General Robert Hasbrouck.
It was a quiet day, but along about 5:30 p.m. I received a very laconic message from 9th Army which read, "Prepare your command for movement to Century." Century was the code name for the VIII Corps. I immediately sent for my G2 to learn the situation down there, and from the Schaeff situation report, it appeared that it was a very quiet front where troops were sent to rest or to be indoctrinated, new green troops to be indoctrinated. After receipt of this message, I decided to send General Bruce Clark, who commanded Combat Command B, immediately to Bastogne, the headquarters of Century, to learn the situation and what our probable mission would be.
I arrived in Bastogne about 2 o'clock in the morning of the 17th of December, reported to General Middleton, was told what he knew about the situation, which I was impressed was not too much. And I was told that after I had had some sleep, I would go the next morning to St. Vith and report to General Jones and move my command there and give him some help.